Which are bigger, Valorant maps or CS maps? And more importantly, does it actually matter? After weeks of research, I finally found answers to both these questions. Let's get into it. Before we get into it, I would like to thank our friends over at Shopify for sponsoring today's video. For those that are living under a rock, Shopify is the driving force behind Shopify Rebellion. Shopify is an organization that truly cares about esports and actually invests in the spaces with state-of-the-art facilities and tech to bring the absolute best out of incredible teams and players. And that same commitment is shared with the Shop app. It's the best place to discover and shop for brands you love, making your shopping experience easy and enjoyable. Whether you're looking for an AI assistant shopper to help you pick out the perfect gift or just an easy way to shop and track your purchases, the Shop app has got you covered. The Shop app will also personalize your shopping experience so that you'll see stuff you haven't even thought about, but will definitely love. Just look how easy it is to find some Shopify Rebellion merch on the app. And you can track the shipping and delivery process step by step so you know exactly when your stuff is coming. Check out the Shop app and of course pick up one of our Touchgrass hoodies. Visit go.shop.app/theScore and happy shopping. Alright, so it's no secret that Valorant and Counter-Strike share more than a few similarities, but nowhere are there differences more apparent than in map design. Where CS is open and flowy, Valorant is considerably more intimate. At least, that's how it feels. You see, there are a lot, and I mean a lot of threads online discussing how small Valorant maps are, and more recently, I've started to see people compare them directly to what CS has to offer. Now, while I'd normally chalk this size envy up to self-esteem issues, I do think it's an interesting conversation, especially considering some of Valorant's gameplay designs. I mean, to be honest, the game can be a chaotic mess sometimes. But are Valorant maps actually smaller? I need more than just feelings. I need cold, hard facts. So, with the help of my trusty sidekick Magoo, we embarked on a journey to uncover the truth once and for all. And our conclusions might just shock you. Now, I already know what you're wondering. How do you compare map sizes in two different video games using two different engines that, aren't real physical places? Well, it turns out while conducting our investigation, it's complicated as shit. And to be honest, we hit a few walls along the way. Now, the first big hurdle we faced when trying to find accurate square meters is figuring out a scale that can work in both games. If you use the ping feature in Valorant, you can see that it measures in meters, which is great. If we assume that Valorant meters are the same as real meters, calculating the surface area would be actually pretty simple. You just divide the map up into rectangles, length times width those puppies, and then add all the measurements, and Bob's your uncle. Unfortunately, Counter-Strike is much more complicated. Since this is Valve and they need to make everything difficult, the Source engine actually has their own unit of measurement. Hammer units. Hammer units, which have their own wiki page, by the way, are used to measure things in pretty much every title that uses Source. And as a result, plenty of creators have used this to compare maps amongst the games. Now, there is a conversion for hammer units to real-world measurements, but this would only work if the scaling in Counter-Strike made any sense whatsoever. Player models are supposed to be roughly 6 feet tall in Counter-Strike, but as many people have shown over the years, these short kings are either lying about their height, or in CS's world, doorways are 9 feet tall and European coupes are actually very spacious trucks. For that reason, we had to go down a different path, and what made most sense to us was finding an object in each game that is the same height as the player. This is because in both games, player height is consistent regardless of agent. Then we convert the object we find in Counter-Strike over to Valorant and scale it to match the object we find in Valorant, and that's because Valorant uses real-life meters and not made-up shit like hammer units. Once again, Riot made this very simple. Radianite boxes, which exist on every map, are all 2x2x2 meters and the same height as the player models. Which, side note, yes, this means that Valorant agents are like 6'6". Obviously, it's for hitboxes to remain consistent, but it goes against like all the lore, and I just think it's funny to point out. Anyway, we had our Radianite boxes, and although it was more difficult, we were able to find something pretty close in CS. This beautiful pile of cardboard boxes. Neither are perfect, but hey, this isn't an exact science. The point is, we had our scales, and it was finally time to map out the square meters of every map. But Since I'm stupid, this was left in the very capable hands of Magoo. First, he ported over the game files of each map into Blender, which, fun fact, turns out you can do in both games. Then we grabbed the scales from CS, brought it over to Valorant, and matched it with the Radianite boxes we got there. As it turns out, CS is roughly 1/3 the size of Valorant in Blender, so multiply everything by 2.7, and suddenly, everything matches. Now we use Blender's measuring tools in an orthographic top-down view to find reference points. We then port those map overview files into Illustrator and match the scales once again. Finally, we trace the map footprint, non-playable area, and overlapping areas before plugging it into a handy-dandy script that calculates the playable area in square meters. Now, at this point, we had a crisis of faith. We finally had our numbers, but we've never done anything like this before, so we felt like we needed a second set of eyes. So we reached out to Lydia Zanotti, an actual 3D environmental artist who worked on maps in both these games, and we asked if our methodology even made any sense.
I mean, I think I would probably do it that way too.
You heard it here first, folks. Me and Magoo aren't complete morons, and that's all we needed to hear. So now we can give you the numbers. All right, so it turns out, surprise, surprise, CS maps are in fact larger than Valorant's. However, the difference isn't that massive. From the maps that we had time to calculate, Overpass is the largest map in Counter-Strike, and by no surprise, Breeze is the biggest in Valorant. However, the difference in the playable areas of both these maps is just under 700 square meters. That being said, Counter-Strike does have much more variation when it comes to their map sizes. Ancient, the smallest map we've recorded so far, is 40% smaller than Overpass. In contrast, the playable area for Valorant maps other than Breeze averages at roughly 6,500.
I feel like there's more of a process at Riot. There's more level designers, there's a whole team of map designers, whereas Valve, has one level designer and maybe one person working on one map, one person working on another. So there is inconsistency, but as far as all these Valorant maps go, I'm honestly not surprised that the number averages around 6,500 or so.
Still, if we look at the maps that are comparable in size in both games, the difference isn't that massive. And if we do what I like to call the field test, we get similar results. If I roughly run around the perimeter of the two largest maps, I do a complete lap about 10 seconds faster on Breeze. Sure, depending on how you look at it, 10 seconds or 700 square meters could be a big distance, but it's not nearly as bad as how people make it out to be online. But I don't blame people for having this gut reaction. Hell, Lydia herself worked on these maps and admits to having this instinctual sense of feeling cramped in Valorant.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers, but to me, I do feel like the Valorant maps are smaller. Even when you take a map like Haven that has 3 whole bomb sites, it's pretty small and straightforward. There are some gimmicks in some of the maps, like on Ascent, where you can shut a door and that kind of slows you down and it kind of helps with the small map size.
However, Lydia and everyone else who feels this way aren't wrong. Valorant maps are smaller, just not always in the literal sense. First off, yes, certain agents have abilities that allow them to close distances very quickly. On top of that, Valorant map designs are incredibly claustrophobic thanks to the sheer amount of angles and indoor spaces on every map. But as some people have pointed out, it's actually a single gameplay design that trumps all. In Counter-Strike, you are frozen to where you spawn until the match timer starts. In Valorant, you are free to walk around anywhere in your designated buy zone, which on defense is over half the map. Not only does this reduce the time it takes to walk to a site, but it means that interactions can happen almost instantaneously. You can get taken out of a round the moment it starts. As a result, it also means that the majority of gunfights happen in a much smaller portion of the entire playable area, making maps feel underutilized and even repetitive, which is something that Valorant's current senior technical game designer noted back in 2020 when he attempted to do this exact same experiment just before he worked at Riot. Now, to contrast, in Counter-Strike, it takes at least 10 seconds before you're able to see an enemy. And hell, there are maps where gunfights literally take place in spawn. And this is where we get to the actual answer, and maybe the root problem for some. Regardless of how big Riot decides to make a map, it's always going to feel small unless they switch to Counter-Strike's style of buy phase. And that doesn't even begin to touch on the issues of claustrophobia I mentioned. That is, if you consider it to be an issue. Despite having small maps that are tight and busy, Valorant is still a very popular game. So the question if size matters is completely up to what you enjoy. I mean, even though many call for larger and more open maps, Breeze is by far the most disliked map in the game right now. And maybe it has nothing to do with its size, but it's an interesting coincidence nonetheless. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed our little game theory session. Once again, when it comes to finding the actual difference between map sizes, it's not an exact science, and there are plenty of different ways you can use to come to these conclusions. There's obviously a margin for error, and we ask you guys to consider this while also inviting you to try this out for yourselves. Listen, it was a giant pain in the ass, but still super interesting. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more stuff like it, let me know. Cheers. So Riot was using the little Teemos as like a replacement for like a meter. They changed someone's ability. It's definitely only 5.5 Teemos now. It's weird. You start using it in real life, you're like, oh yeah, like I'm just gonna go pop down the street to the convenience store. It's like, oh, how far away is it? I don't know, 1,500 Teemos? I don't know.